Hi guys, welcome to my channel. This is Bar Talk with Ola and my name is Mujolalo. I'm so thrilled to have you here once again. Today I want to talk about the rights of a tenant in the property he has rented, and I would probably also talk about the duties of a landlord to a tenant to whom he has rented his property. I know that I've spoken about how to eject your tenant as a landlord and how to eject your tenant who has abandoned the property as a landlord, but today let's talk about the tenant. What are your rights in the property that you have lawfully rented from your landlord? There's an umbrella right that I would like to address. It has some other subsumings and some other rights under it, but there's an umbrella right, and that is your right to quiet and peaceful enjoyment of the premises. As a tenant, you have the right to peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the premises that you have rented for the period for which you have rented it. By law, you are entitled to peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the property that you have rented, and that can mean a lot of things as stipulated by the law. The first is that you have a right to privacy. That simply means that you have a right to enjoy privately the property that you have paid for. For instance, if you have rented a 3-bedroom flat from the landlord, you have a right to put your house under lock and key if you're traveling or you're going to work or something, and you have a right to open it to whom you want and when you want. That means that the landlord cannot come in behind you when you've gone to work and break down your door and go in and say that maybe he wants to use a room or he wants to, pick something he has forgotten. No, you have a right to privacy. That's the first thing. You have a right to use the premises privately. That means that, when you put your things somewhere, they are protected. Nobody can barge in at any point in time, not even the landlord or his agents or cronies or privies, and say that, oh, we want to use this part, or we came to pick something, or we want to enter into your premises. No, it doesn't happen that way. You have a right to privacy. The second right that you have is the freedom from unreasonable disturbance. That means that if you are in an apartment where the landlord is living with you, for instance, he cannot come tomorrow and say that he wants to construct a car garage, in front of your entrance. That's unreasonable disturbance. How would you go out and come in to your own apartment? So even though he's the landlord, he cannot do that. And that applies to the whole world. You have a right to freedom from unreasonable disturbance from the whole world, and including your landlord. For instance, now he can't say tomorrow, your landlord cannot come and say that, oh, I want to install a power generating set and I want to put it right behind your window. The noise, the smoke, the soot, everything would be affecting you, so he cannot do that. You have a freedom from unreasonable disturbance, in the property by the landlord and by the whole world. You also have exclusive possession of the property, which is subject to restricted inspection by the landlord. That means that the landlord cannot come into your apartment, for instance, without your permission. You have a right to exclusive possession. Note that in a tenancy, the ownership still resides with your landlord, but the possession goes to you for the period for which you've rented the apartment or the property, and then after which it reverts to your landlord. So while you have the possession, the landlord cannot come in at will, cannot come in and go at will. He is subject to your permission to enter the premises for inspection purposes. For instance, if he wants to check his house, maybe it's still in good condition, or he wants to carry out some repairs or something, he has to come and take permission from you before he can come. He can't barge in, he can't break your door while you're not at home, or even while you're at home or something. So you have exclusive possession of the property, and that includes the landlord and the whole world. The whole world, it's exclusive to you, the possession within the period for which you have rented the apartment. Another right is the use of common areas for reasonable and lawful purposes. That means that, if there are some common areas or in the premises, for instance, if you've taken a 3-bedroom flat in the compound that has other buildings and you have some leftover areas where you can all park your cars and something, you can park your own car there too. The landlord can park his car if he's living with you. Other tenants can park their car. That's a common area, and you can use it for lawful and reasonable purposes. If there's an open garden in the premises and you'd like to probably host your guests, have a party therein, once it's lawful and reasonable to do that, you can go ahead and have your party. So those are common areas that you can use. If there's a common room, if it's like an hostel where you've taken, each person has paid for their rooms, and there's a common room, to receive guests and to entertain guests and do all other things, you have a right to use that common area for reasonable and for lawful purposes. And of course, the last thing is that if you have agreed in the tenancy agreement with the landlord for you to make some repairs or to make some adjustments to the building for your own comfort, if the landlord gives that permission outright when you're leaving the premises, you have a right to remove those fixtures and fittings as appropriate or get compensated for it by the landlord. I know that what most people do is that, for instance, if you've installed a kitchen cabinet, you probably wait for the next person that is taking the apartment to reimburse you for it if they need it, or you just take it off the apartment and you take it away. So you have a right to actually ask for compensation from the landlord if he permitted you to, make those adjustments or repairs to the property. He has a duty to compensate you, or you could remove those fixtures and fittings as long as you deliver the property back to him in a tenantable condition. And I think that's the chief duty of the landlord to you, is to deliver the property to you in a tenantable condition. So you have a reciprocal duty at the end of your tenancy to deliver back to him the property in a tenantable condition. When we talk about tenantable condition, it just means that in a condition that can be lived in. So you have a right to deliver the property back to the landlord in a condition that he can bring in other tenants into the property and they can live in the property. So you cannot destroy your landlord's property before you go, just because you just have possession and possession reverts. So he has a duty to let out the apartment in a tenantable state, and you have a duty to return it to him in a tenantable state. So that's it. Now let's talk in more detail about the duties of your landlord to you. So your landlord also has some obligations to you, which I'm going to go ahead and discuss. And one of those things is that he shall not disturb your quiet and peaceful enjoyment. Your landlord shall not disturb your peaceful and quiet enjoyment of his property. That means that he cannot come in and constitute a nuisance to you, so long as you have paid and you're complying with the terms and conditions of your agreement and the law. So you have a right to enjoy your property, the property that has been let to you, peacefully and quietly. So your landlord is not to disturb your peaceful and quiet enjoyment of the property. You can't bring in thugs, or say that, for instance, you have rented a residential house and there's a common area. Maybe he's not a living landlord, for instance. He can't just come in one day and throw a party in your common area without informing you ahead of time, making noise, disturbing the whole place. He has to take permission from you or preclude himself from doing that completely, because you have a right to peaceful and quiet enjoyment of your property. For the example that I gave the other time, he cannot come and install a power generating set behind your own window, because you are not to endure the soot, the noise and the smoke. It's not done. So legally you have a right to enjoy the property peacefully and quietly. Another duty of your landlord is that he should pay all the rates and charges accruing to the property. So there are rates and charges like land use rents, all those local government taxes, all of those things that are accruing to the property. It's your landlord's obligation to pay those rates and charges. So usually what some landlords do is that they subsume it into the rent that they are collecting from you. So they will take it out of the rent and pay. But however the landlord wants to do it, it's not your duty, it's the duty of the landlord. For instance, if I'm living in a property and they bring the charges, the bill of charges, for the land use rent for that year or that month or however they bill it, it's my duty to just call the landlord and say, oh, they've brought the bill, come and pick it up or something. So it's not my responsibility as a tenant to pay those rates and charges that are accruing to the property. It's the landlord's duty. I know that some landlords have a way of going around this, but whichever the case, it's actually the landlord's duty to pay all rates and charges accruing to his own property. It's also the landlord's duty to keep the premises insured against loss and damage. I know that landlords around this place do not really take out insurance on their properties, but it's actually their duty, their lawful duty, to take out insurance to insure the house, the premises, against any loss or damages. And I think that insurance in this case might not only mean that, taking out an insurance, an insurance package, or paying premium to an insurance company, in case of loss or damage. It also means that, ensuring that no harm, loss, or damage will come to the property while you are living there. For instance, if the house is located near a body of water or a canal or a dam or something of the sort, it's the landlord's responsibility to make sure that maybe the fence or the walls are strongly built such that you don't have flooding and all other things coming into the property. Yes, that's a form of insurance. It's also the landlord's your landlord is also under obligation not to restrict the use of a common facility or service, for the premises. That means that, like I've said earlier, the common area for parking your car. Now, your landlord cannot come, or your landlord has an obligation to ensure that all of you are enjoying, that common facility. You cannot come tomorrow and say that the common room, for instance, if it's an hostel condition, he has now let out the common room to a catering service and they will now use it as restaurants, when in actual fact, when you were taking the house or taking the room, the common room was for you to receive your guests, was for everyone to receive their guests, probably have their small parties and all of that. You cannot now rent it out to a catering service or a laundromat. So you have a right to use those common facilities and services freely and without encumbrance while you are on the property. Another obligation of your landlord, he has no right to seize your property while you are in the premises or interfere with your use of your apartment or the portion that you have paid for and rented. For instance, some landlords might come and say that, oh, your generator is making noise, and then before you come back from work one day, the landlord has carried your generator. So your landlord cannot do that to you. That's not legal. He can't seize your property. He can't interfere with your entrance into your property. You've paid your rent and you have not breached any law, any rules of tenancy. He can't come and seal up your property one day or suddenly. You have a right to freedom from any encumbrance or unreasonable disturbance for the property you've paid for within the period for which you've paid. And another duty of your landlord is the obligation to maintain the common facilities and the external facilities in the property. It is his duty to maintain those common facilities, like maybe the parking lot, outside of the gate, the common area and all. Of course, when there are tenants in the property, there's a way that landlords reach agreements with them, to work out how those things will be maintained. But it is the obligation, the lawful obligation of your landlord to maintain the common facilities and common services, common areas that are in the property. So those are the obligations of your landlord to you, and your rights as a tenant to enjoy the property that you have paid for. Essentially, we can sum up these things as follows. You are a tenant in a property. You have possessory right, not ownership. The landlord has both possessory and ownership, but once he rents out the property to you, he has let go of his possessory rights. So you have a right to enjoy the property peacefully and quietly, without any encumbrances, without any unreasonable disturbance. The landlord should insure the property against any loss or damage. You should be able to use the common areas for free and peacefully, and he should deliver the property to you in tenantable conditions. That's the most important thing, because I know that there are landlords that would rent out properties that are in very, very terrible conditions to their unsuspecting tenants. They do it a lot. For instance, I visited someone and the property, had a recurring plumbing issue. It was the landlord that was supposed to have fixed that plumbing issue before the tenant moved in, but the tenant did not know. Because, for instance, that if you're looking for an apartment and you get there and you ask them about the plumbing and everything, of course everybody will tell you that, oh, it's working well, it's working fine. You know how agents can be dubious and all of that. And of course, if you get there that day, you turn on the water, everything is running fine, you won't start looking around for the pipes and to check, oh, which one is leaking, which one is not leaking, and all of that. So those are things that you cannot completely figure out at the point of renting the apartment. That's why the law puts the duty on the landlord to actually make sure that it delivers the property to you in a tenantable state. So the landlord is supposed to deliver to you a property that can actually be lived in peacefully, quietly, and enjoyed. And when you're returning his property to him at the expiration of your rent, you are supposed to deliver it to him in a state that he can bring in another tenant and deliver it to them in a tenantable condition. You have no right whatsoever to destroy the property of your landlord. As you enjoy it, so you deliver it to him for him to pass on to others for enjoyment of the property. If people would do this, life would be very wonderful. You know, landlords know their rights, they know their duties. Tenants know their rights, they know their duties. Everyone is doing what they're supposed to do, and life is such a happy place. So in this episode, I have looked at the rights of a tenant and the duties of a landlord to his tenant, his or her tenant, under the law. I hope you've learned one thing or the other in case you're a landlord or a tenant that can be useful for you in your future landlord-tenant relations. I will always see you in my very next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Toodles!